The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Cable or Rogers TV.
Speaking, I'm David Shearman. My guest today is Alex Ruff, who, if you don't know, is the Member of Parliament for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and always a welcome guest on the show. Alex, good to see you again.
Good to see you, David. It's great to be back.
Yes, and speaking of back, you're back at work. The House is back in session, and
Parliament's back in session. I've been at work nonstop, really. Although I will admit to your watcher viewers that I actually did take myself and give myself a week off over this Christmas recess. So I did take a break, and it was well enjoyed. But Parliament's back at her, and it's been a crazy couple days to start. Yesterday alone was a little nuts with the voting app that we moved to. They had done some upgrades to it, but the second vote, literally, it failed for everybody that used it. So it turned into a bit of a smozzle to get everybody in and voted because everybody's having to log back in through Zoom and do it that way because the app failed. But they've reassured us it's going to work for today, which is good because we have 10 or 11 votes after question period today.
Right. And once you leave this interview, you're off to question period.
Right to question period.
which is always a bit of an entertainment, as people can watch on CPAC and watch I won't say the fireworks, but watch the shenanigans.
Watch the political theater.
Yeah, I like that term. Many years ago, my grandfather, actually, the family gave my grandfather a cable TV subscription just so he could watch CPAC. And I heard later that the problem was that he got so agitated that my grandmother actually had to say to him, "Ernest, calm down." So
when I'm home in the riding and talking to my mom and dad, I have to remind Dad to just quit watching some of this stuff. He can ask me questions, but he doesn't have to watch it 24/7, or all the different analysis and stuff that's out there, especially on some of the stuff, because it irritates him and gets him agitated too. And when I'm his age, I intend to be much more relaxed and just not too concerned about what's going on in Ottawa when you're fully retired. It's great to be concerned and stay up to date. Everybody has a right to participate, but at the same time, you've lived a full life. Make sure you're enjoying it too and not getting too upset or agitated over stuff that goes on in Ottawa.
And if you want to express yourself, get out and vote.
100%.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the weeds here a little bit because I quite honestly have lost track of what the heck is going on with Ben Lobb's bill, C-234, the farm carbon tax bill. It was passed by the House with amendments. It got turned over to the Senate. And when I interviewed Ben before Christmas, it was still hadn't not quite made the Senate, and then it did. And now it's back in the House. Huh?
Yeah.
Explain that.
So look, actually Ben's bill had no amendments done to it at the House of Commons level. It got through with complete opposition party support. Even a few Liberal backbenchers supported it. And it got through the House pretty relatively, through the normal process. It didn't get fast-tracked by any means. It then got to the Senate, where it got delayed, and the Senate did propose a pile of amendments. They kept tabling. The Trudeau-appointed senators kept, bringing forth amendments that had already been tried in the House of Commons and turned down, and they kept bringing them back at all the different stages. And the challenge with the Senate is a lot smaller numbers, a lot more split on how people were voting on it, and ultimately there was 2 amendments that passed that basically gutted half of Ben's bill, as I'm pretty sure he explained, and took out the carve out that would have protected our farmers, the heating of their farm installations and buildings. Still would have been all right for the grain dryers from the propane and natural gas side, but it would have taken the building facilities out of it. So there's some good news and bad news. because everybody had to spin a bit, because Senate changes to private members' bills is very, very rare. In that it happens once every, well, this is the first time I think since 2017, and it'd been likely better than a decade or something before the last time something like this had occurred. Where it gets complicated now, the good news is Ben put a motion on the table as soon as just before we came back, rejecting all the amendments. So, and he was able to trade up in the private members, order of business. And he was the first thing we debated. 11 o'clock on Monday morning, first day back, Ben was able to get traded. So he was the first issue to be debated. So there was another hour of debate on it. And, the good news is if once it comes to a vote, it'll be a vote on the original bill. And providing the House passes it again, it will go through. And we've been reassured that the Senate will not play their shenanigans this next time round. The bad news is it's a unique thing where private members' bills that get amended get amended by the Senate and then get sent back to the House. There's no timeline on it. The House of Commons had adopted a number of years back sort of rules around private members' bills, like when I say a while back, in the last 20, 25 years, because prior to that, governments could just basically ensure no private members' business passed because they just drag it on forever. So that's why there have been new rules changed to the procedures that limited the amount of time, which forces votes on these issues to at least determine one way or another. If everybody supports it, well, then government, you got to let it through, and it's got to come to a resolution. There's not that rule for private members' bills that get amended by the Senate when they come back to the House. So the question really is, and you'll see my party continue to put pressure on the Liberal government to say, you got to let this go through, because ultimately they can drag this on now for as long as they want. Now, the other good news is we have the flexibility to continue to trade up. And so we'll just keep bringing Ben's bill back and delay other bills, because this one's super important, by getting Ben up to, his bill up for debate. So, so there's good news and bad news there, but I'm crossing my fingers and hoping we'll have a resolution here by summer that it will have got back through the House of Commons.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the royal assent is it can be withheld, or it can be delayed, can it not? So let's assume it gets to the Senate, passes the Senate, but the actual declaration can be played with.
I don't think so. Like, sometimes a bill will specifically state within it of when it comes into effect. But normally a bill has, I think, 30 days. Like, once it's passed through both houses, both chambers, it has to be, royal assent needs to be given. There's no way to delay it. And I mean, royal assent's normally given after the Senate's approval is done, but I mean, unless it's a Senate bill. So we do have bills that start in the Senate, go through the Senate approval. Once the House has approved it, then royal assent will be given. So I don't think they can delay royal assent on Ben's bill at all once it gets through the Senate.
Well, dare I say it, it's almost like a good bit of drama.
Well, there's definitely a bit of drama around it, because again, it raises the debate all the time about, the role of the Senate and being unelected. And again, when it impacts specific things, it's there to provide sound advice. And that's why the Senate's process is normally is that they will provide, that's their right and why they're in existence, but they'll provide commentary or comment. They may make amendments and changes. They send it back. But as I said, they normally then recognize that if the House rejects what they've suggested, when it goes back to the Senate, they don't play with it again, because they understand this is the will of those people that were elected by the citizens of Canada.
Very true, very true. They are called the Chamber of Sober Second Thought, but that doesn't mean they have to take forever to think about it.
100%.
It's our Canadian governance system is absolutely fascinating, and I apologize if viewers find that conversation a little weedy, but hey, you ain't seen nothing yet because we're going to be talking about private members' bills again because Alex has got a couple of private members' bills in the works. The most recent one, and I thought this is most fascinating, is C358, eliminating the goods and service tax in respect to carbon pricing. And what's that one about, Alex?
So it's I did table it back in September because I am the next name up on the replenishment order, which there was a chance I could have made the cut in September when we came back after the summer recess last fall. However, I didn't. So I'm literally the next name, which that next replenishment is going to happen, I think, on February 15th. So in a couple weeks. And but anyway, my bill is really simple. I had a number of constituents that reached out to me. It never made sense to me in the first place, but why are we paying a tax on the carbon tax? So it just really eliminates the GST off the carbon tax. And I was a bit surprised just last week. There were some news articles that ran in some of the major media outlets. I know Global News ran a major one as well. CBC, I think, was going to. I don't think they've published anything yet. But talking about what the parliamentary budget officer did a costing note on my bill that was released last week, which shows that the GST alone is cost on the carbon tax, just the GST on the carbon tax, is costing Canadian taxpayers just shy of $500 million right now. 486, I believe, for this next fiscal year, starting 23-24. But if it was to remain in effect, the carbon tax for the next 8 years, with the Liberals quadrupling the carbon tax in that time frame, it would cost Canadian taxpayers over $1 billion in GST just on the carbon tax alone. And so when you add that all up, it's somewhere north of $6.2 to $6.3 billion of potential cost to the Canadian taxpayers, which those numbers were a lot bigger than my sort of back of the napkin calculations when I sort of tried to figure out what it was costing Canadians. So I hadn't asked PBO to do it, but I was very thankful for them that they did do it because it provided some clarifications on that. So that's my first PMB, that one it's already in the system, and I could move it for debate. But at the same time, I've just drafted a second private member's bill, which because technically MPs can table as many private members' bills as they want. Some of the other parties, especially the NDP, do a really good job of this. At the start of every parliament, they'll table 50 of them that are all outside the order of precedence, as we explained earlier in the show here, David. They'll never get the opportunity to move them, but it's a way to signal your intent on certain policy issues. And NDP not being in a position to very likely to form government ever, that's sort of why they tend to do this on a regular basis. Because they'll promise stuff or put a bill forward that they know they never actually have to deliver on. But ultimately, in this case, I've been, my background in the military around national security and intelligence issues. There's in my viewpoint, a big gap in education and understanding of just how complex the world is, the global situation is when it comes to national security and the risks that are out there. And unfortunately, a lot of members, both in the Senate and in the House, will never become fully aware because a lot of the information is classified. There is no way for a member of parliament, to really get a security clearance. And even if they do get a security clearance, there's no guarantee that they're going to get the information. However, Parliament has exerted its will. Recently, two good examples are the Winnipeg Lab documents under this current government. In the previous government, it was Parliament wanting to see the Afghan detainee files. And again, they couldn't hand them over. The government, in this case, the two different governments, were reticent to do it and their excuse was, well, you guys aren't cleared. You don't have the appropriate class clearance to see this classified information. So in the end, solutions were resolved that ad hoc special committees were formed that allowed, representation from the different parties to then go get a security clearance and get it. This took much debate back and forth between the government of the day and the opposition parties. Then finding people, getting them cleared, and getting this access to this information. What I've put forth in a PMB that's just being finalized right now is actually allowing a way for members to get a security clearance. And so just changing the process. My intent behind it is to see the committees like National Defense, Public Safety, Foreign Affairs that are dealing with this regularly to have that clearance. The members of those committees having that clearance, but any member could technically now apply, and the government can't deny their ability to apply for the security clearance, because really the two underpinning premises of security clearances and protecting our classified information is one, that you've been cleared and that you have a clearance, and number two, that and you've been vetted to get that clearance, and number two, that you actually have a need to know. And so a lot of people don't, think that just because you have a clearance, you can see everything. Well, I maintained my top secret security clearance from when I left the military, because if I hadn't been successful at getting elected as the member of parliament for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, I'd have to find a job doing something else. And obviously, with my background and getting involved in the defense industry might have been one of my options. Well, I wanted to maintain my clearance, so I had it transferred from the Canadian Armed Forces to a couple of private companies that then gets held through Procurement Services Canada to say, hey, Ruff's been cleared and he still has it until the 5-year or whatever, depending on what level it is, expires. So I still had it when I was elected. Did it mean the government or any of the departments, if I ask for the information, that I get to see it? Absolutely not. Just because you have a clearance doesn't mean you have a need to know. And so the government right now, if a different MP, any MP, we could pick Ben Law, which pick on Ben, and say Ben's filled out the applications for secret security clearance and applied for it. The government would deny it because they just go, why? You don't have a need to know. So if you don't need to know why would you need to have a clearance, right? Now, he could maybe get it as an individual if he worked part-time for another, for a company that worked in the sort of a silo of national security, defense industry or something like that says, all right, he's a part-time employee of this company that has a requirement to have a clearance. Well, then maybe he could get it through his company or through that company that he's employed by, but not as a member of parliament, which to me creates troubles and it delays the process. It decreases understanding and education, but more importantly, decreases transparency and accountability of the government of the day. And so I put this forward. I'm hoping I'll get unanimous support, across if it's the one I choose to move, which I likely will, because to go back to my previous private member's bill on getting rid of the GST off the carbon tax, well, that'd be an interim measure. It'd take a year plus to get it through the system. And, excuse me, and, excuse me again. Sorry about that, a bit of a frog in my throat there, David. That even if my PMB on removing the GST off the carbon tax got through before the next federal election, it would be a bit of a defeatist approach when, I'm confident in the ability of my party to form government after the next federal election. And one of our big planks is to remove the carbon tax completely. So even if I was able to get my other PMB through, and get the GST off the carbon tax, if it received royal assent 2 months before the next federal election, it's really not helping that much. Whereas this other bill will not be contentious at all, in my opinion. We'll see. And hopefully I get unanimous support and it actually changes things to allow Canada in Parliament, both in the Senate and in the House, to take national security more serious and to become, step up our game in dealing with the risks and challenges and threats that Canada faces.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Alex, because as I listened to your explanation of your private members bill, it's actually very, very germane to what's actually happening in Ottawa at this very moment. What I'm thinking of is a comment that is actually on CBC as I speak, from the former head of CSIS, who said there is too much secrecy in the government, for that the government itself or the agencies engage in way too much more secrecy than necessary. The other thing is that this also is being raised around the investigation, the inquiry into foreign interference in our election processes. And the government has said, "I know you can't see this stuff because it's confidential, and you're not cleared to see it." But if the House or if a judge can't have access to some of this material, I think you're onto something, that maybe we need to look at these clearance issues and ask the tough questions. It's one thing to have the clearance, but as you say, it's another. If you don't have the need to know, you don't have a right to see it.
And look, and there's some information, and again, as you're well aware, and some of the viewers are, I am one of the privileged few to sit on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, who has been studying the foreign interference, the longest study that committee has ever studied, and since its existence, 6 years ago now. And we're finalizing our report, and it'll go through the process. And there's lots of that report, unlike the one we just finished and that just got released publicly on federal policing, the federal policing mandate of the RCMP, which if you read that, anybody can go online to the NSICOP, is the short form website. There's only 2 paragraphs in that whole 70+ page document that's been redacted and changed because of security concerns. The foreign interference one, I'll be shocked if half of it or more will be redacted, and it's because it is sensitive. And even if you had a secret security clearance, doesn't mean you'd get access to a lot of that information, because some of it is very sensitive, and it has to be. And again, because it's how did our organizations obtain that information. We have to protect those methods in order to either protect people or protect technology, because if that information was to become public, you're compromising our ability to protect Canada. So, but at a secret level, at least we can educate those that have the privilege of being elected by the people of Canada to better understand this and to better understand where that balance is. But to go to how we opened this segment about former CSIS directors talking about that information's overly classified, 100%. We overclassify as the default within the military, within CSIS, within the RCMP, within CSE, a lot of these different organizations that are in this sector. They take the easy out sometimes, and they just, everything sort of that you're typing up gets classified at whatever level or whatever system you're working on. And we need to do a much better job of not overclassifying the information in the first place. But one thing we're really bad at too is then declassifying information and doing that analysis. Because one of the things, the military is a better example other than specific technologies, right? You're going to protect your stuff on your F-35s. You're going to protect certain stuff that obviously, would possibly allow enemies of Canada to figure out gaps or weaknesses in your military tech. However, one of the things that a lot of the stuff that I did say in Afghanistan was secret at the time, but that's because it had an operational risk associated to it, that if that information was out publicly, well, the Taliban would know where we're showing up or what we're doing, and they'd figure out, well, a lot of that stuff after we're no longer in Afghanistan, there's really no reason for that information to be classified. And our current system has a way to declassify it, but it's decades and decades, and it's not automatic either in some cases. So I just think we need to do a better job because, the bad news for your viewers, the world's getting more complicated and threats are going up. Putin right now, if you listen to some of the reporting that's coming out of the Baltic nations from their chiefs of their military or the presidents and the prime ministers of those respective countries, they have basically put some of their industry on a war footing because they are not liking what Putin is signaling and what Russia potentially could do. So, fingers crossed we don't get there, but we need to be prepared.
And we haven't even touched on the Middle East, where it's literally a powder keg. And now Canada is not heavily involved in terms of personnel, but hey, we're part of we're part of the world, and it's our trade runs through the Suez Canal.
No, absolutely, and I mean, Canada likes to say, like the government likes, one of the things, that say, hey, we want to get back more engaged internationally. Unfortunately, my, I guess, partisan opinion, I think we've gone the exact opposite way of where we needed to be that trusted partner and that recognized voice on the world stage that can sort of, broker deals and be directly involved. But yeah, you either have to have the ability to partake in the workload and sharing it. And I mean, it's one of the things that, when the previous conservative government stood up the mission in Ukraine, I'll applaud the current government continuing our support there for the training side of the house in particular. I'm critical of the lack. They've made a lot of promises. In fact, I just saw a list earlier today of listing all the sort of, former equipment, ammunition. It was over a year ago now, or darn near. Maybe it wasn't a year ago, but how many months back the government said we were going to give the Ukrainians a surface-to-air missile system. Still not delivered. And so, we need to be, especially when we promise something, we need to deliver on it too in a timely fashion. So it's challenging, but Canada, look, I've said from day one, yeah, times are tough here, money's tight. There's lots of stuff that we can do to cut waste, I think, in government spending. But at the same time, we are privileged to be a G7 country, to have the ability to be a player on the world stage, but we got to commit to it too.
Well, I recall a comment made by, it may have been a former chief of defense staff. I'm not sure, but the comment struck me that we are still very naive as Canadians about the global conflict and about the difficulties that the world actually faces.
Yeah, we are. Look, I did a podcast with my colleague MP Jamie Schmale. We actually did it in December, but it only aired a couple of weeks ago, and we spent the better part of half an hour talking about the military, and we played a couple of clips that came out from the current Chief of Defense Staff, Wayne Eyre, that my best wishes to General Eyre. He's retiring here this summer after 40 years in uniform, but I served in Afghanistan with General Eyre back in 2007. And Admiral Topshee, who did a phenomenal video on the state of the Navy and the challenges that they're facing. The world, as I said, like, the good news is we haven't had a global conflict since World War II. The bad news, and some of it can be associated with decisions that have been made domestically by the United States of America, where they are sort of pulling back a little bit on their role in the world stage. And you can debate, the good and the bad about that. But when countries like the US, that has been the global superpower for so many years, pulls back, somebody else is going to fill that vacuum, fill that void. And in the past, traditionally, it's been countries like the UK, France, and Germany, and Canada that step into that void to sort of pick up the slack. And we need to do it again. And so Canada's either got to recognize that, look, some of the stuff that we've taken for granted that contributes to global security and prosperity around the world, and the world's become a lot more globalized, right? We have our international supply chains, so much stuff that we do is fundamentally different today than it was at the end of World War II. And so when something happens, as you said, in the Suez Canal, Panama Canal, like look what happened there in the Panama Canal back during COVID when I can't remember what happened, but everything got sort of blocked up, and they have a month or two backlog of ships that are trying to get through, and then it forces changes in patterns and behavior, and it has an impact from those industries, because then they figure, well, it's actually easier to go a different way, maybe greater risk, though, if you're going around certain, the Horn of, you're going around South America, going around Africa, it becomes complicated and greater risk their way. But then that, especially in the Middle East, if you're not using the Suez Canal or you're doing certain things like the whole risk they have with the piracy challenges off the east side of Africa, like it's all interlinked. And what you didn't think would happen or that would have any impact on us in Canada or North America are impacting in particular. And I think it's our federal government and our provincial governments, everybody's got to take a relook at domestic manufacturing and our supply chains around key things. It's one of the reasons why, as the world moves more towards greenification or electrification around certain things, some of the key minerals and elements that are needed for batteries and more, we have an abundance of them in here in Northern Ontario and in Canada, but we got to get the stuff out of the ground in order to capitalize on it. So, and then bring that sort of manufacturing and processing capacity back here to Canada. So, what was how does that say? What was old is new again kind of deal. In that, I think that as things went a little farther, there's that. Sort of resetting of certain key things and a recognition that the world, as much as everything was all rose-colored glasses, everything was going to be great. We got to reestablish our supply chains with trusted allies and partners, and I think wean off some of our dependency on, in Canada in particular, on the communist regime in China. And another thing that I think Europe's recognizing is there's way too much dependency on Russian natural gas, and there's somewhere that Canada could be a key partner in helping provide that stability in Europe as well.
And with that, Alex, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back because I'm not finished yet. I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking, and yes, we'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
This is Rogers TV.
Hey, I'm Jay Crawford.
And I'm Cedric Gano. And make sure you tune in on Attack Rap every week
on Rogers TV to make sure you know what's going on with your own sound tech.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest is Alex Ruff, who is the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. And oh boy, have we ever been into the political weeds on this interview, Alex? Actually, it's been a pleasure because that whole business about security and such has been very, very enlightening. So thank you for that. But I wanted to switch topics and ask you about the by-election that's upcoming in Durham in March. This was the former seat of the former Conservative leader, Aaron O'Toole, and he held that seat for quite a number of years. And before that, it was Bev Ota, I believe, who held that seat. And I think the Conservatives have held that seat for about 25 years. They've got a named candidate. And so will you be canvassing on behalf of the Conservatives in the riding, do you think?
Well, I haven't talked to Jamil. I mean, I did meet him personally for the first time during our national convention in Quebec there back in September. I had a chat with him. I don't think he hadn't been our named candidate yet, but he had announced his intention to seek the nomination. Yeah, if my schedule allows and I can get out there, I'd love to help Jamil. I think he's a phenomenal voice. He's a former radio person. He's not afraid to, speak to issues. He's a great communicator. But if I can do anything to help and the schedule allows, I'd absolutely love to get out there and help door knock and get that support out for him. But I'm confident Jamil will be successful when the by-election occurs.
Yes, it's a very interesting race because the Liberal candidate is a local politician, a municipal politician who from Port Perry, and then the other part there are other. The NDP and a couple of the other parties have also got nominees. So it's by-elections are funny things. There's one school of thought that says, well, they're an opportunity for people to vent their spleen and object to the incoming government. On the other hand, people say, well, it's a time to test drive political campaigns. So I think both are possibilities.
No, absolutely. I mean, it'll be, it could help weed some additional announcements on potential platform planks that we may be running on. I guarantee the government will be trying to run on their record, but on stuff that they've delivered on. But we'll see. A lot of the times it gets more interesting when it's in those swing ridings, when it's in sort of your established ridings that are, it doesn't seem to indicate as much. I think, it'll be more interesting since the previous sort of round of, I think we had, 5 or 6 by-elections earlier this past year, spread across the country. They were all pretty much in traditional held ridings, and the vote result ended up being exactly the same kind of deal, or the end result. So, both sides used it to kind of make their case, but we'll see. And what I found interesting was the St. Paul's riding. So Carolyn Bennett had announced that she's resigning, or that she has resigned, and yet that by-election wasn't called. And that's really interesting because they could have done it in the Durham one at the exact same time, and you think they would have, as you said, Durham's been a traditionally conservative held riding. St. Paul's has been a long time Liberal held. I mean, I don't know how long Carolyn Bennett's been there. She's been there a long time. Yes. But I think, as in the case there, polling indicates the NDP maybe have a legit chance of knocking the Liberal candidate off. So I find that fascinating because that may signal some of the current government's concerns, and the Liberal Party of Canada's concerns about, all right, we got to do something different, or we got because they've sort of pushed that one off. So look, if polling's polling, my party's doing very well in the polls, has been for about a half a year now. But I only put so much in, and you can't, I would in some ways prefer to be sort of still sitting, I guess, back in the bushes a little bit from a polling perspective, not locally in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, but on the national stage, because ultimately, when you're out front, it means everybody's gunning for you, and so we'll see how it's coming. But ultimately, I do think the next election is going to be a change election, which doesn't bode well for the incumbent government, whether regardless of what party it is or what level of government you're talking. And so, when Canadians have made up their mind that they want to see a change, you know, it doesn't mean anybody can take it for granted on any side of the spectrum. But ultimately, you know, I'm optimistic that we'll see some change across the country.
But you mentioned St. Paul's. I think Josh Matlow has announced he's running in that riding, if I'm not mistaken, a well-known local municipal politician in Toronto. And the other one that actually is very current is David Lametti, who
David just gave his final speech, I think, yesterday.
Yes. So there'll be a by-election sometime probably before the summer in that riding as well.
Yeah, the government has 6 months to call the election once somebody's resigned.
Yeah. Well, you know, you can't tell the players without the program, and the program keeps changing. So we'll just keep on keeping on. Well, let's move on to some more local things here. You have always promoted the Canada Summer Jobs Program, and I know that the window is closed for this year, but let's talk a little bit about that. The Canada Summer Jobs Program has historically been a program that has encouraged businesses to hire young people, to give them work experience, and what else does it do?
Yeah, no, the program's there to engage youth, I think, from 18 to 30 to get out there. It does provide some financial support to small business. Not-for-profits and charities are overwhelmingly the ones that really look forward to it, but even municipalities can apply. So I've had my criticism of the program in the first place is, all right, if you're a small business, once you're established, you better not depend upon this money, because again, it's not a really strong business plan. Municipalities do have other sources of income and it's just smart business, both for a small business, a municipality, or even a not-for-profit, that you should be encouraging and wanting to attract youth into your organization, because that's how you maintain and be prepared for turnover, etc. During the pandemic, it was a program I really supported, because unlike the emergency student benefit that the government came out for 1 year in COVID, which I wasn't a fan of at all, they could have put more money into Canada Summer Jobs. They eventually did. The problem was with the advertising right across the country, the recognition of the ability of it, and then with the expanded funds to it, applications went through the roof, demand went through the roof, funding had gone up. Well, now we're back to, even this past year, back to sort of pre-pandemic funding for the program. So in reality, haven't seen this year's numbers. I don't get that for another couple months before Service Canada will reach out sort of with their initial analysis of those applicants that will be successful or haven't. But traditionally, since day one, other than that one year when the funding was really doubled, if not more, demand is normally twice. It is twice what the funding is. So we'll be lucky if we get, I think there was 79 organizations that received funding across Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound last year, of 350 or something that applied. Funding's around the 40-45% mark. So as I said, I think I get to influence it MPs get to set local priorities, which are worth 10 out of the 100 points when Service Canada scores the applicants. I've spent time the last 2 years running information sessions, so any applicant, any organization that's considering applying can better understand the process. Because the biggest observation I've made under the Canada Summer Jobs It's not who's most deserving or necessarily who should get the funding or support. It's who can write the best application. So I'm a little cynical on that side. So I've been doing what I can to help inform all applicants, I don't care who you are, that when you're applying, you got to really read the applications, you got to fill out the information properly, and you got to answer it. So it took me a lot of teeth pulling, and I changed it right across the country. So MPs at least know how their 10 points are allocated. Because I couldn't get that out of the bureaucracy and out of the system, and that took my personal engagement with a ton of emails with Minister Ian to get that information. Excuse me. So basically the way it works, I set 5 local priorities. If any applicant meets one of my 5, they get 5 out of 10. They meet 2 of my 5, they get 10 out of 10. But if you don't write that in the box on the application, it won't matter. So you could be the David Shearman Farming Corporation, not-for-profit farming corporation, I guess that's good, not-for-profit farming farm that focuses on supplying needed food to youth and seniors at risk. Well, my 5 local priorities are: number 1, ag, hunting, fishing, conservation. That's one group together. Support for small business. Yeah. Number 2, support for not-for-profits. Number 3, support for youth. Number 4, supports seniors. Number 5. Well, you're a not-for-profit. You're a farm that's designated to support youth and seniors. If you do not write any, and that could be the title of your organization, if you do not write that in the box under local priorities, you'd get scored 0 out of 10. So it's the bureaucratic nature, unfortunately, of how these things get scored that can be frustrating, I think, for certain people. So I've been really pushing hard to educate applicants to say, look, you got to be pedantic about this. You got to read exactly what it says and be repetitive if you have to be. Just because you've clicked the box at the start of the application saying you're not for profit, when you get to the local priority section, make sure you list, I'm a not for profit again, because otherwise they will not. It's like they're not reading the front part of the document or something. I don't know. So in the end, though, it will provide, I think, just shy of $2 million, I think last year's number of funding to local not-for-profits, small businesses, charities, and municipalities that are successful to get out there, get youth 18 to 30 employed. And it's just, it's a program that exists that I know the demand is definitely up, and people look forward to it every year.
Great. Well, let's talk about another program that your office is involved in, and that is the Canada Revenue Agency's Community Volunteer Income Tax Program. And I'll tell you why this matters, because it was pointed out to me, and I didn't realize this, that the issue of filing an income tax return is often essential to qualify for various programs and benefits. I was talking to someone this week who said, well, gee, people don't have to file a return if their income is below a certain level. I said, oh no. Even if you're below, you got to file to get whatever benefit you're looking for. And, but your office is trying to change that.
Yeah, so obviously you don't need it for certain things that, like your CPP or your old age. But if you're somebody that's well below that line that qualifies for things like the guaranteed income supplement, if you're dependent upon other provincial potential benefits that you have to prove your income, well, yeah, you have to have a filed income return, tax return. And unfortunately, there's a lot fewer people doing it in person. A lot of seniors don't have access to, computers or the internet or the skill sets. So there are lots of the ones that are very dependent upon these free community tax clinics that are in the area that are struggling. I mean, I'm glad you brought this up, David, because I've had Bruce County Library that's involved, Bruce County that's been involved, but through the Bruce County Library, I've had United Way and Jill Umbuck with the Poverty Task Force. They just put something else. I think, in fact, I should be resharing it. I think it went out just yesterday or on Monday about needing more volunteers, because a lot of their volunteers were older and have, sort of retired. So they're looking for more volunteers to help out with this. And so, and my office is directly involved for just the Owen Sound area to help book the appointments and stuff like that with the volunteer groups. But ultimately, we do have access to it. You can find for the viewers out there, it's just freetaxclinics.ca. If they go to that, and if you want to volunteer, the number 4, capital B, capital G, taxes.ca. So that's volunteer for really bruce-grey-taxes.ca. But those are two, for those that are out there that are watching, but you need to get your taxes done in order to qualify for certain benefits. I think your climate action incentive, you need to do it in order to get that as well.
That's correct. Or the child tax credit, or the list of, I was astonished. But I'll tell you, one of the other things that I saw, and that you mentioned the Poverty Task Force, that they did a report last fall, which pointed out, using StatsCan numbers, that there are about 40,000 people across Grey Bruce Huron who are eligible, who fall below the income line, who are eligible for these free tax clinics. And in the communities where they were, well, first of all, of that 40,000 people, 10% of those people actually file. So 90% of that group is basically not filing and leaving money on the table. How much money? This is what blew me away. The average tax refund for that particular group is between $3,000 and $4,000 per taxpayer. Money that's getting left on the table, as well as other income. And this has nothing to do with ODSP or OW or anything like that. This is money which people are entitled to. It's absolutely, I was gobsmacked when I read that. But the other thing is that, yes, they are looking for volunteers to complete the tax returns. You don't have to meet anybody if you don't want to. You don't. There are local coordinators, and if you want to find out more, call 211.
211.
Francesca Dobbin can pay me for that one. No, in all seriousness, it's 211, and they will help. They will hook you up with the local programs, and they're all across Grey Bruce. So, and it's the way I'm framing it is, it's a great way to help our neighbors.
It is.
Great way to help our neighbors. Well, let's also move on to another area that your office is always involved in, but I don't think gets enough, I won't say publicity, but doesn't get lifted up enough. And that is the immigration work that you do. Someone I know received a wonderful Christmas present. They were immigrants from another country, and just before Christmas, they received their permanent resident cards, or permanent resident status, which means they have a lot of work and a lot of ability to work, and they were over the moon. Wonderful early Christmas present. So your office was, as they told me, your office was absolutely essential in keeping things moving. So thank you.
Yeah, look, don't thank me. I'll thank Kim and Lisa and Carla and Cameron that are in my office. They're the ones that deal with most of that stuff, and I have very little involvement unless it's such a gong show that I have to personally engage with the minister. But the challenge, new immigrants face, but a lot of people face with the federal bureaucracy, whether in this case it be the IRCC, whether it be Passport Canada, Service Canada, CRA, is it's complicated. And so my team has become, almost your local resident experts on sort of navigating the federal bureaucracy and the puzzle palace. And so therefore, that's what we're there. We're there to help. We're there to help navigate. And in your case with these the immigrants that are seeking something like their permanent resident status, when you're working in a second language in a lot of cases or third language, trying to fill out documentation that's very bureaucratic in language, it can be complicated. And the problem with a lot of this, if you do it yourself, you mail it in, and we see this with passports even all the time. If you do it and you made a mistake, well, if you've left something blank, well, then sometimes they'll call you. A lot of the times it just gets mailed back to you, and it can take an extra, weeks, if not months, in delaying. So I encourage anybody that, you got an important file, you're not 100% certain, come into my office. My staff will throw their Mark 1 eyeballs, using some military terminology, over the document and make sure, yep, looks good to us. And then that way we can just help process it. And then if you do run into roadblocks, we're already aware of it. And if you've given us authority to, look into your file on your behalf, which we do need a signed consent form for to do any of that, it allows my team then to engage and help navigate and resolve those issues. So I'm blessed to have a great team.
Now, before we started the show, you said that it can take citizenship applications can take a number of years, and the citizenship is not an easy thing to get to once you're in Canada.
No, I think that it is a 6-year minimum that you have to be before you can qualify. I know there's been discussions around fast tracking it for somebody that joins like the Canadian Armed Forces, but in general, it comes, but you still have to do your test. You have to apply for it. Like I remember meeting people locally. They never really bothered to get it because they didn't, for whatever reason, they chose not to. I think it was a former bartender at Base Meaford, been here 30 or 40 years, and had never bothered getting her citizenship because she was just living here as a permanent resident. But ultimately, because you got to pass the test, there's other things that you need to do, and sometimes personal situations. I think some Canadian or immigrants or permanent residents, it's a constant battle because different countries, depending where you come from, have different rules around maintaining citizenship. And you got to, Canada does allow you to hold citizenship in other countries, but those countries may not allow you to hold a Canadian citizenship and still hold citizenship in whatever country that you've originated from. So we help all the time, but again, it's nice when I put a package together. We do get a list, I think every month or every quarter, I think it comes in, of any new citizens, people that have received their citizenship that reside in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. I get that on a quarterly basis, and I do fill out letters of welcome, even though they've been here for likely years, but to just congratulate them on their citizenship and to, give them additional information and resources that are available through the federal government that can enable them, and just contact information for a number of things, including my office, to say, hey, we're here to help.
And with that, Alex, I want to thank you for a great show. Very informative and very interesting. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And I'll let you get off the question period.
Thanks so much, David. All the best in 2024.
Thank you, Alex. Take care. I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking, and yes, we'll talk again.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Hi, I'm Tiffany James, the host of Her Story. Join us on Rogers TV as I interview various women in our community on how they found success in their own way.
Man, is there a lot of pressure on this young fighter here tonight.
Fighting is life.
This is my belt. I earned this in blood, paid in full. This is mine.
Everyone gets knocked down, but fighters get back up.
You cannot break me.